everybody, welcome back to the FWE Test Kitchen. Your host Damon Anthony, and today we're going to cook up some meatloaf. Today we're going to utilize our RH18MT. First thing we're actually going to do is go ahead and start with the glaze that's actually going to go on the meatloaf once it's about 80% cooked. So to do that, we are going to start with a little ketchup and brown sugar, a little granulated garlic, and some honey. And so we got about 2.5 cups of ketchup here. I'm going to add that to the saucepan. We're going to add about 1.5 cups of brown sugar. We're then going to go ahead and add about 2 tablespoons of granulated garlic and about 3 tablespoons of honey. And really what we're looking for is just for all of these ingredients to be combined into one nice sauce. Sauce will be pretty thick as the sugar starts to meet with the ketchup. Give that one last little final stir, and we're just going to set that aside for later. Alright, so we're going to jump right into getting the meatloaf started. So I know people may have mixed emotions about what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to go ahead and start with some diced onions and diced peppers. I do like peppers and onions in my meatloaf, so we're just going to go ahead and start this on medium-high heat. Got about 1.5 cups of diced red onion and about 1.5 cups of diced sweet peppers. We just want to saute these up till the peppers and onions get soft. I'm not really trying to cook them fully, but just break down, pull a little bit of moisture out of the peppers and onions. So we'll just saute these really quickly over medium-high heat. So while these peppers and onions are sauteing, again, just to kind of cook down a little bit, one thing that I like to do when I'm making my meatloaf, and this kind of general rule goes as well for like meatloaf, if you're making a homemade meatball as well, you're always going to have some type of breadcrumb component. And you should always have in your recipe some type of milk. One thing I like to do is actually start with my breadcrumbs. That's about 2.5 cups of breadcrumbs and about 1.5 cups of milk. And I like to add my milk to my breadcrumbs before I add this mixture to the meatloaf. I'll just give this a quick little stir. And what that does is actually gives the milk a chance to be absorbed into the breadcrumbs, and you'll see the final product will be a very nice, spongy, fluffy meatloaf. Once those are about, at this point, about halfway done, I'm going to go ahead and add my chopped garlic. So I have about 2 tablespoons of minced garlic here. Just going to add that right in. And go ahead and give that a nice toss with the peppers and onions as well. Be getting a lot of fragrance from those peppers and onions and garlic at this point. Almost there with the peppers and onions. They've been sauteing for about 3 or 4 minutes now, just on medium heat. At this point, I like to go ahead and add my next ingredient, which is just a basic Italian seasoning blend. Dry herbs a lot of times get a much needed boost if you add a little heat, give them a little toast before you add that ingredient to whatever dish you may be cooking. They're looking really nice here. Gonna go ahead and take these off the heat. We're gonna be adding 6 pounds of ground beef. This is a ground chuck. It's an 80-20 blend. And this is right out of the fridge, so it is nice and cold. So adding that to the hot vegetables or warm vegetables isn't gonna cause a lot of concern. Going to add that right to the mixing bowl. And to that, we are actually going to go ahead and add about 2.5 tablespoons of Greek seasoning. We're going to add about 2 tablespoons of fresh chopped parsley. We're going to add about 1.5 cups of ketchup. Next step, we're going to go ahead and go back to our breadcrumbs that have been soaking in that milk, and as you can see, breadcrumb is taking on a nice spongy consistency. Really you want them almost the consistency of wet sand. Should be able to form in like a nice little dough ball in your hand. So we'll go ahead and add these breadcrumbs to the mix. And the last step we're going to do is we're going to add 6 whole eggs to this. Another kind of just a little tip for meatloaf in general, for every pound of ground protein that you're using, for every pound you want to use 1 large egg. So 6 pounds of ground beef, 6 whole eggs. Now comes the beauty of it all. A lot of people will use a wooden spoon or maybe a spatula, but these are really going to be the best tools you can use. It's just use your hands to really get in here now and go ahead and mix up your meatloaf. So I just want to make sure everything is nice and fully mixed. Get in there really good. Takes you back to like Halloween in elementary school, you know, when they tell you to put your hand in the bucket. What is it? Is it eyeballs? Is it brains? Well, it's meatloaf. So get in there with your hands and really mix that together really, really well. It's very important actually that you get all of the ingredients mixed really together really, really well. It's going to help the consistency of the meatloaf while it cooks. Make sure that all your flavor is spread out nice and evenly throughout the meatloaf as well. And if you've made a few meatloafs, you know that ground beef kind of tends to clump up a little bit as you go. So just use your fingertips to break it up as you go. So what I'm going to do is actually split this into 2 roughly even size portions. And at this point, just give yourself a little time and make sure that everything is completely mixed. One thing this is also helping doing is getting rid of any air pockets that are in the meatloaf. A lot of times if you've done meatloaf before and you cut into one and it may have a big air pocket in it, probably wasn't needed as long as needed it to be. So just want to knead that dough like you would be doing a bread dough. We've got our meatloaf nicely kneaded now. All the air pockets are out of it. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and form our meatloaf. One thing I like to do is just kind of start on the sides, pressing in and rolling. You'll start to see the loaf start to elongate almost like a breadstick if you were doing a classic bread dough. But keeping good pressure on the meatloaf will also ensure that those air pockets don't redevelop inside. So there's our first meatloaf. Now we're just going to go ahead, give this guy a quick roll, and get it onto the sheet pan. And we're just going to repeat that same process with the remaining ground beef. Guys, there it is. These meatloafs are ready to go in the oven. I'm going to do a little quick cleanup here and we'll get these guys in the retherm. We're going to go ahead and set our oven up to go ahead and prepare our meatloaf. So we're going to again use our RH18MT. We want to go ahead and set our oven for 350 degrees. We're gonna set the cook method to cook by time, and we're gonna cook this for 35 minutes. We're gonna set our hold temperature for 155 degrees. So once that 35 minutes cook time elapses, it'll default down into the 155 hold temp. We're gonna go ahead and set this to cook with high moisture. We're also gonna set the hold for high moisture. We're gonna set our venting schedule. So I want the vent to remain closed for the first quarter of the cook, the second quarter of the cook, the third quarter of the cook, and then I'm gonna open the vent for the last quarter of the cook to allow some of that moisture to escape and start to develop a nice crust on the outside of the meatloaf. So just a couple of minutes, this guy will preheat and we'll load the meatloaf. Alright, so we've got about 15 minutes left in the cook, and now I want to go ahead and glaze these meatloaves. Just using the tomato brown sugar glaze that we made earlier, and we're just going to go ahead and pour this on. We'll finish letting that cook, get a little color, let that glaze develop a nice crust. Give it another 10 or 12 minutes and we'll be good to go. All right, welcome back guys. So as you can see, we have removed the meatloaf from the Retherm oven. This guy is ready to go, but we're just gonna let that hang out, cool down slightly. Just like with any type of protein that you cook, you really wanna give this 5, 10, 12 minutes to just hang out once you take it out of the oven. All the juices on the inside of this meatloaf, again, like any piece of protein that you may cook, are moving around really, really fast. Everything's really, really active on the inside as far as the moisture content. So if you go and slice into it right now, all that moisture is just gonna spew right out. So the rest that you hear a lot of people talk about is very, very important when you're cooking protein. And in the meantime, we're gonna go ahead and get some sides going with this. So I've got some halved Brussels sprouts and some fingerling potatoes. So we're just gonna start these really quickly. There we have it, just a quick meatloaf, Brussels sprouts, and roasted potatoes.